Hey, this is Cliff with Elevate Music Production, and in this video I'll be showing you how to EQ. I'll simplify it as much as I can, show you a couple of examples, and then give you an assignment that you can try to familiarize yourself more with EQ. Okay, so the best way to think about EQ is in lows, mids, and highs. Breaking it down into just 3 sections helps you, especially if you're not that familiar with EQ. It's a good way to start. So your lows tend to sit between 20 hertz all the way up to about 400 hertz. And then from 400 up to about 5K is your mid-range, and then 5K and above are your highs, normally where, sibilance sits, your S's and T's and all that. All right, so whenever you break it down like that, another thing to keep in mind is that different instruments sit on different parts of the spectrum. So, if you have a bass, it's going to be down here. The human voice normally sits around 1 to 2K, and then cymbals, hi-hats, things like that sit way up here, above 5K. Those are some examples. I'm going to show you the instruments that I used in this piece of music, and then show you where they sit on the spectrum. So here we go. Alright, so this is the bass. You can see where it sits. It goes all the way up to about 500 hertz. And this is the cello. It sits between about 100 hertz and 1K, a little bit closer to 2K as well. This is the violin. It sits pretty much from 200K up to, or 200 hertz up to 5K. Then you have the piano. Now the piano kind of sits about the same place that the violin sits. So we'll have to address that because they're sharing the same space. You're going to need to EQ and decide which one's more of a priority. So I'm going to mix the violin and the piano. So I'm going to solo both of those. That way I can hear what I'm doing, and then I'll pin this EQ here so that it doesn't go away, and then I can pull up this other EQ. Here we go. Alright, so I'm going to let these play and see where they sit exactly and decide which frequencies I want to hear more out of each one. Because they're sharing the same space, you're going to have to decide which frequencies are more important. So, higher frequencies for brightness, lower for body, and kind of background. Okay, so we can see the levels that these are at while they're hitting. The piano, most of its body is right here. So I'm going to focus that and then cut that away from these strings and then try to push the higher end of these strings up to make up for what I'm taking out down here. So we'll focus on about 600 hertz. I'm going to cut the 600 hertz out of the violin. That way it pokes through more from the piano. And then the frequency that I'll boost over here will be about 3K, which will brighten it up and then create some separation. So I'll go over to the piano and then cut from the piano what I boosted over in the violin, which is 3K. Alright, so there's a lot of body in low end, so I'm not going to boost that because there's already a lot of strong energy in any low end. So keep that in mind. But we will cut way below 200 because it's totally irrelevant. The bass is going to fill that frequency range, so we're going to cut it out of both of them. Now you can see there's not much happening on the high end of these EQs, so it's fine to go ahead and throw a filter so you don't have any stray frequencies popping up later anywhere. Now you can hear more separation there, and this is before panning. So by the time you pan, you can actually get a little bit further separation. So let's pan one to the left, one to the right, just slightly. And now I'll give it a little more space. Okay, now that we have the violin and the piano working well together, almost as one instrument, we know that they're going to occupy the mid to higher frequency range. Now the lower ones are going to be the bass and the cello. So let's solo those together, and then we'll mix those. Now, luckily, they're kind of, at the end, they're sharing the same space, but in the beginning, they're kind of alternating between the two. But we'll pin these up and look at them. So the bass is covering this little space down here, you know, which is, of course, where most basses and 808s and all that are going to sit. So I roll off the very, very low end from essentially 20 hertz and below, or 25 in this case. And then I noticed that a lot of body of the notes coming out of the cello are right around 200. So that's where I'm going to focus the energy of the cello. So let me cut below that. I want a little bit of brightness out of the cello. So I'm going to boost just a little bit up here. And then because they're sharing these frequency ranges, I'm going to cut out right here, which is at about 400 hertz, and keep that information over here, but then I'm going to cut out where we have boosted. So some of the live frequencies on the cello, I'm going to be cutting out of this bass, which is about 200 hertz. Now, of course, on the bass, I don't need any of that high-end information. And not much over here with the cello either. Now, whenever you cut this many frequencies, you can use the gain. Every one of these EQs have makeup gain, and that's there for you to boost your volume back up if you need to. But these levels, I don't really need to boost them. All right, so let's pull that back just a little more. All right, cool. Now we have the cello and the bass mixed together, and we have the violin and the piano mixed together. And if we wanted to, we could bus these together, send these two channels to one of their own and these two channels to one of their own, and then EQ further if we needed to. But we'll listen real quick. I don't think we're going to need to. Okay. Alright, so this example I used VSTs. You can do the same thing with audio if you want. As long as you have a clean recording in, EQ shouldn't be a problem. If you have bad recordings with, say you record in a home studio and you have standing wave issues or resonant frequencies that are just way too boosted going in, those are the kind of problems you'll face when your room's not treated. Then EQ is really not going to do much for you ever. It has to sound pretty good going in before you start tweaking a lot with EQ, so keep that in mind also. Alright, so for an example, for a challenge for you guys to try if you want, find a couple of instruments, whether they're synths or pianos or virtual instruments or real instruments that are in the same frequency spectrum range. Say you record 2 different takes of guitar right over the top of each other. Try to EQ those two to create as much separation as you can between the 2 instruments without panning or anything like that. Alright, thanks for watching.